Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game podcast with news and reviews and design talk and Teos Abadia.
Hey, Shawn, how are you doing?
I am surviving.
That is what we do these days. Yes.
That is what we do, and we are going to talk about games and things that bring joy to our lives.
Indeed, indeed.
And what brings joy to me are listeners.
Mm-hmm.
They come to us via all the social medias and via email and via Patreon and via YouTube and so on. And so we take these questions or comments and we talk about them. And we're going to do that again, starting with Stever8029 via YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a danger of writing the quote, same old stuff if you read everything that gets published? For example, if I read every 5e publication written, will my work just be more of the same? Which, in my opinion, isn't amazing. When I photographed weddings professionally, I looked at thousands upon thousands of wedding photos from other photographers, but I reached a saturation point and my work started to look like everyone else's. I guess there are two philosophies on this. Just a thought I'd throw out there. Teos, what do you think?
I think it's a really reasonable question. I've not run into this problem, and I've been kind of at work for a really long time. Maybe because this is a different space than wedding photography, right? I could see that there are only so many angles, or especially if you took portrait photography, I like make it really simple, right? There are only so many angles on the human face or something like that, but and how well you could bring out their personality or whatever. But at least in this area, I don't know about you, Shawn, but for me, you could say just we need a simple goblin fight, right? And okay, how do we deliver on that simplicity and make it still a lot of fun? Like I get excited just thinking about that as a permutation, like as a challenge. Like I don't think, oh, I've had a lot of fun goblin fights, so we're done here. Like I think there are always new and interesting ways to do things. And that's part of the joy of this hobby is I feel like I never run out of what I could be inspired by or how I could handle something, how I could do something differently 4 years later than I did the first time or something.
For sure. I think there's a lot of, like you said, this is a very reasonable question. It's a good question. I have a lot of things to say, but I'm going to start by saying that I think adventure design is a different animal than other forms of writing or other forms of art. Since this media is not meant to be just presented in front of an audience, it is written and then interpreted by a game master who then presents it to players who then get to add their own input.
Yeah.
And so there's that element of it right away, right? I'm not a photographer in any stretch of the imagination or a visual artist in any way, but I can imagine you can do lots of things and you can see a lot of different ways. But you also know that if you go and take the photo from the back of the person, that's likely not something that they are going to want as the audience for your work. Whereas the audience, I could take an encounter and I could turn it right around backwards. And I could say, hey, guess what? You walk into the room and you switch your souls with the goblins
Yeah.
who you are fighting, and they have taken over your body.
Yeah.
Now, what do you do? Right. That is something, and that can then go through the interpretation of the game master, which then goes through the interpretation of the players. And it's a simple goblin fight, like you said, Teos, but it's completely different now.
Yeah.
And so it's just a different medium. But in terms of like learning things and experiencing things, I had a teacher, or he wasn't actually a teacher, but he was someone who I interviewed, a writer named Frederick Bush, who wrote a lot about being a writer and a great writer who never got the recognition he deserved while he was alive. And he said that the act of writing a story is entering a conversation with every other writer who's ever written. And when you think of it on that level, that's what you're doing, right? You're entering this arena, you're entering this conversation. So you need to know what other people have said in order to take part in that conversation. There's also jazz great Charlie Parker, who's been quoted many different ways of saying this thing, and I will say it and I will bleep out the profanity. It's first you learn your instrument, and then you learn your music, and then you forget all that bleep and you just play.
Mhm.
And that's what you're doing, right? You're reading everything to understand everything. And then you can go do your thing. And if it sounds like somebody else's thing, that's okay. And if you go way off and you do something completely different, that's okay too,
Yeah.
because you know what you're doing. And it's along the same lines of you have to learn the rules to break the rules.
Yeah.
Right? If you want to do something different, you better know what is standard in order to do the different sort of thing. So all of those things come to mind when I get questions like this. And it's you don't have to read every single thing. And it's okay if
Mhm.
your work
Mhm.
sounds like someone else's work because there's always going to be a new game master who will appreciate it. There's going to be new players that appreciate it.
Yeah.
So it's okay if it has the same form or the same uh, tone or the same encounters or the same monsters as something else.
Yeah. And true of subsystems too. I've been sort of dual wielding my reading time, reading about exploration and reading
Mhm.
about stronghold systems and just like pondering
Right.
how they're all designed, right? And so I took a look at bastions. I took a look at, 3E stuff and what Forbidden Land says and all these different things and A5E and you name it. And then similarly with exploration. And it's interesting. And one thing I would say is that there are some times when I feel like the design has sort of locked itself into this pattern, right? Like it's
Mhm.
a hex crawl or it's a point crawl or it's, but we don't kind of, sometimes we could be better served by stepping back and going, what is the experience supposed to be? And we might get
Right.
something a little different if we do that,
Yeah.
than if we, get it when we're just sort of iterating tiny bits off of the same chassis, then
Mhm.
then we may not get to where we want to, right? So there can be some places where we're just in the same place. But maybe
Yeah.
I'll close up my comments on this. If you have your wedding, it is hopefully for you your first wedding or your last. Pick one,
Yeah.
and maybe even both. And when someone takes the close up of your hands together, like that's like an
Mhm.
awe, right? Like we got that
Right.
picture that looks amazing.
Yeah.
It may be the 500th you've shot, but for that
Mhm.
couple, it's hopefully a
Right.
really, really awesome picture, right? And I think it's
Right.
the same way with a lot of these things. If you create a serviceable travel system or stronghold system or whatever, then people are going to be like, "This is so great," right? And that's
Mhm.
kind of 90% of it right there.
Yep. Absolutely. Next question comes from Joey Wright via that flaming hellscape. Shawn, I love how you sprinkle bits of your university game design class into the episodes. As a fellow academic and a fan of Sly Flourish, I was curious how you prepare for lectures or episode recordings, and if it's similar to the lazy DM approach. It just hit me that getting ready to teach a class lecture is kind of like getting ready for my home game, just without the swords and goblins. And I was wondering which has the swords and goblins, the class or the game? Could you take a game loop approach to teaching?
Wow.
Yeah, and this is. I thought
Wow.
about this so much that I was glad that the question was asked, but I started answering and I'm like, okay, I got to stop. I got to stop, or I'm going to write a book here. So I've always said, and Teos, I think you said this as well, that the skills of a game master are almost always in line with the skills of a good teacher
Mm-hmm.
because you need to prepare and you need to execute in very much the same way. As a
Yeah.
teacher, what do? You plan. You have a curriculum that generally you need to cover. You have restrictions on how much time, how much effort, how much technology that you have to use to teach that curriculum. And then you have the students who are the wild card in all this because they need to come away with the skills and the knowledge and stuff, and they all have their own quirks and their own needs.
Yeah.
Uh, that's very
Mm.
much like a role playing game. And then when you're actually teaching, right, you have to deliver this lesson that you've created. You have to manage the students and make sure that they are absorbing this and getting the information. And then you need to be ready to improvise when things might not go right. There's a fire alarm in the middle of your class. A student has 12 questions that you didn't plan on answering, but they really need that answer. So what do you shorten? What do you elongate? All of that. Uh, I'm going to stop there, take a drink, and let you step in here, Teos.
I think that's fantastic and very true. I think that if you DM enough, like this is a fun thing to try to do, which is detect when you get a DM experience point. Like just stop and think about that and try to see if you can do this, because there are times when a player throws something at you and you handle it, and if you manage to think it through and step out of just being in the moment, you'll realize, oh, I just like went up a level in being a DM, right? That I actually handled that chaos that came at me well. And that directly transfers to the job world, right? Certainly to teaching. My parents were both teachers, so I know teaching well from that side of things. And then I work in consulting, which sometimes feels a little like teaching, right? There's a lot of delivery and framing, and you have to get people to buy into it and want to then do their work that you just told them about. And there's some similarities there, just like you said, like that idea of how you prepare, I find is strongly assisted by my DMing, right? Because I know that I need to do this level of prep, and then I know what I can improvise and what I can build upon. And I know that the best way of engaging the audience is for them to be a part of it and not for it just be me, right? If I lecture at, especially in the contract consulting world, like if you just tell people, there's only so much, but if you can get them to be a part of it, you're on an entirely different level of acceptance and engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings us nicely into this game loop concept, because the game loop concept for role-playing games is there's always this cycle. And this cycle reinforces play. It guides play and it reinforces play. So when we roll initiative, everyone knows, okay, we are doing this thing. We are setting the tone for what's coming next.
Yeah.
Then you know on your turn that you have these things that you can do. And you can generally know when it's going to be your turn. Or if it becomes the game master's turn, you know that I need to pay attention here because they may be effects that are coming my way, or even other players' turns. You may know, depending on the player type or their class, how you can interact with that. So that's a game loop in gaming play. In teaching, you can set up a very similar thing. So if you're teaching a 40-minute lesson every day, you may start with what's called an anticipatory set. So it is this thing that you do at the start of every day that gets the students in a mindset to learn. And it might have something specifically to do with the lesson, or it might just be a tactic to focus. For my class, every start of every class, I do a tip of the day. And it's a grammar tip. This is how you use an apostrophe in this situation. This is how you actually use a comma correctly. And it doesn't necessarily track to what I'm going to be talking about in game design, but all the students know this is coming. And when I put it up on the screen, everyone's head goes up. And I joke about how important this is in their lives and how it's the best part of the class. And so they laugh about it, but it tells them, all right, chat time and warm up is over. Here we are going to, and then you might say, today we are going to learn these 4 important topics, and this is how we're going to learn them. And so what you're doing is you're setting them up to understand what's going to happen. And that's a sort of loop. If you do it every class, then the student will always be in that frame of mind when it comes out that this is the lesson, and then this is topic 1, and this is topic 2, and here's this point. And it works really well, to the point where if you break that cycle, that it shocks people. Oh, well, there was no tip of the day today. What do we do? Right. So there is that sort of thing in education as well.
Great point. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So thank you. We have other questions, but we need to get to the news. So we will get to our other questions next week. We are going to get to our news and commentary section, starting with D&D Beyond, teaching us how to create campaigns and prepare an adventure. So there have been 2 back-to-back articles on D&D Beyond by Riley Silverman. she uses the current Dungeon Master's Guide, the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, to guide us through. In the first article, how to create our first campaign. And in the second article, she talks about building an adventure and
Mhm.
preparing the session to run it. So these are all up on D&D Beyond right now, links in our show notes. But it's a really nice, here is how you can use the current 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide to do the things that you need to do as a new game master. And it spells it all out and then points you back to the book to do so. Did
Nice.
you get a chance to look at this at all, Teos?
I just took a quick look at it,
Yeah.
but not in depth. And what I found was it does a nice job of summarizing, mirroring those chapters, which I have read. So I know the
Yeah.
chapters better than I know the articles, but I see that they kind of echo that approach, which is good. What'd you think?
Yeah, I thought it was a very nice primer for, hey, guess what? How many times have we said over the years, people have said, well, it would be nice if they had told us that. And we're like, it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, right? Because people don't read it, people don't know what's in
Yeah.
it. So articles like this, I think, will be important to let people know it's all right there. Here's a little summary of it. So you want to create your campaign. Here's how you could journal to do so, and then
Right.
create a premise, and then start your campaign and plan adventures within your campaign,
Yeah.
and then think about the ending of your campaign or the 4 steps for adventure design. Preparing an adventure is the beginning of your adventure, knowing your players, planning the adventure, and then preparing the session. And this is, it's, if you've done this for a while, it's nothing revolutionary.
Right.
But if this is your first time, or if you've been a player and you're about to get into this is some just great, sound, solid advice.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked when we reviewed the 2014 DMG. I remember saying at some point, there's nothing here that really addresses like how you do your campaign journaling, and yet
Right.
Chris Perkins had a whole article series during 4th edition where he went into like his previously on Eomandra and how he wrote all these notes and how he would introduce sessions and decide whether the players would do the recap or he would, and just like that to me was such critical advice, and then it wasn't in the DMG. So I do love to see this, and I think the real strength, there are a number of strengths to the 2024 DMG, but the advice and the framing of, it's not like it's a perfect capture of all essentials, but it's good enough that it really is a great capture of the essentials you need for running a campaign, for structuring an adventure, and far improved over the 2014 version, I think.
Yeah, and then you gain an experience point as you carry these out
Yeah.
and learn those lessons that you need to learn
Yeah.
by doing. So I thought that was great to see those. You can,
Yeah.
again, check those out on D&D Beyond, links in our show notes. From good news to sort of bad news, the Critical Role minis that were coming from WizKids have been canceled. Tell us about that, Mini
Yeah,
Master
it's so
Abadia.
far 2 sets, so maybe it's not who knows what that foretells for the future or for other miniatures, but there were 2 that folks could pre-order, right? So you could go to the website and you could pre-order the Shade Mother boxed miniature or the Exandria Unlimited Calamity box set. And folks who did that got an email from WizKids saying, your order has been canceled, we're not making that set. And so fans were very surprised by this because it's pretty unusual for WizKids minis to be canceled. I'm not going to say it's never happened, but I can't think of a case where it's happened. And so for it to be 2 Critical Role sets, maybe is another indication. We've talked about this, we've seen this in the past in sort of other ways, that the level of support that Critical Role fans have for RPG products may not match the obviously incredibly high level of support they have for the show or many other vehicles, right? Novels or things like that that are more directly tied to the show. So it's a bit of a shame, really. And I have to say that, and other folks commented this as well that I saw, but if I go to like my local gaming store, if I'm looking online, the Critical Role minis are often discounted.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just, as cool as it may be to have that awesome villain captured, it's not a monster that other people recognize. And so maybe they're not picking it up, or if they don't super know the show, then they don't really want those minis. And anyway, but it was interesting, right? That you might have said at one point, oh, this will be like printing money, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Guaranteed
Yes.
success. Well, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, we've seen this sort of play out in other areas, not just minis, of how much crossover is there between these tangential RPG focused IPs and the player base as a whole.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
we will keep looking at that over the. I wanted to add, speaking of canceled things,
Yeah.
I had mentioned last time that I got a note from Wizards of the Coast saying that my payment had not gone through for my Dungeon Master's Guide. I got the bundle, and I wanted to give a follow up. So I got the one message saying your payment was not approved, but there was no link to what to do. So I thought, well, I'll wait. I got a second email saying the same thing. Your payment was not accepted, so you are not going to be getting your book. I thought, okay, fine. Then a couple days after that, I got an email saying, ignore the previous two emails. They were a test and they're not true. And I thought,
Test.
okay, yeah,
Okay.
it was like, so they said it was from some sort of test.
In the
So
event
I
of
said,
an actual
great.
cancellation.
Yeah, right. So I thought, okay, cool. I'll be getting my book. And then a day later, I got an email saying, oh, we really couldn't take your payment. Your payment was not accepted. So your order has been canceled, but here is a link. Now, at least this time they told me, here's a link. Go to this link, put in your payment information again, and then here's a discount because I had bought the bundle. So I already had the digital version on D&D Beyond, and you will get the discount to get your book as per the bundle. It was super easy. Follow the link, put in the code, boom, done.
So like to
Your
rebuy
book
it, basically.
to rebuy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought, thumbs up, cool.
Yep. They
I'm
fixed it.
good. And within 3 or 4 days, my book had been delivered. I got an email. Your package was just delivered. I was like, cool. So I run down, open the door, look down, 2 Dungeon Master's Guides. I have no idea what happens.
You expected
I
one?
I expected one. So I don't know if the first one really wasn't ordered. I have to go still check and see if the original payment was canceled for the original book, or
did you
if
buy two?
or did I buy 2 but both at a discount? I don't know. I've got 2 books. They always come in handy as prizes or giving away to new players. So it's a whole thing. But if anybody else went through that, let me know, because I'm still trying to fathom what the heck happened.
I heard some variations of this. I know other people got the cancellation notices, several that I heard of. Maybe selling direct isn't that easy. And maybe you want to keep that Random House distribution deal there a little longer. Maybe. Just saying, what do I know? It's not my area of expertise.
Who knows? Speaking of who knows, Weapon Masteries 101. Our Discord shared a video by D&D Unoptimized, which explained weapon mastery options and how to optimize them. I played in my first 2024 game this weekend, a ranger, so I had weapon masteries, and we were all confused right off the start. With the whole Nick thing, we didn't quite know what it meant. Do you use the weapon and then you get it, or do you get it if you have a Nick weapon? All took us 20 minutes to sort out the weapon mastery.
You needed this video.
I did, but I did not watch the video, Teos. So what did this video tell us?
It's a pretty fascinating listen. It's about a 20-minute, maybe it's 30, I don't know, something like that video. And he does a terrific job of explaining the options, and he points out some things that you might not think through, right? And a lot of this is clearly, though the channel might be called Unoptimized, clearly that's a joke, because he points out things like if you use slow, it won't stack with itself, but it stacks with the slasher feat. And he points out, slowing somebody by 20 feet is no joke, right? Like that can really add up in what I would say is a terrible, frustrating way I'd never like to see in the game. That's just my commentary. And then he says with topple, interestingly, there's no size limit, though with push, there is. And he says it's a con save, but he breaks down the math and says it's basically 50% chance across all levels of play that you're going to topple somebody. even though Khan looks like a strong save for most monsters. And he does acknowledge things like the abuse of topple, how it might slow down the game, and how it can combo with other weapon masteries. And that's the part that I really appreciated from this video, where he goes into the idea of if you have multiple weapon masteries, and especially if you're dual wielding, but even if you're not, how you can do what's called weapon juggling. And he argues that the design between 2014 and 2024, if you look at what's changed, it's really clear, or at least highly suggestive, that switching weapons is intended. And in fact, 2014 says you can draw or sheath one weapon on your turn.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it, right? Very clear, very limited.
Mm-hmm.
In 2024, the wording moves this drawing sheathing to the attack action. And you can either equip or unequip, which includes dropping to the ground or picking up off the ground or sheathing or whatever. You can do that as part of the action. So if you equip a weapon before an attack, you don't actually have to use it for that attack, right? So the whole idea of like drawing your whatever and being ready, well, when it comes time to attack, you could just swap to something else. And he breaks out a segment where Jeremy Crawford is talking about weapon masteries on one of the early videos. And Crawford says, quote, "You can start using one weapon for one of those attacks and another weapon for the other one, the other attack, and exploit their different weapon mastery properties to create some fascinating tactical combinations." So it's not like, sometimes Jeremy has said things like after people revealed a problem, and you're like, well, maybe they're just sort of making it look good. This is before any problem, right? This is early on. This is the intended design that they want, right? So the video also talks about the dual wielder feat, where you can draw or stow two two-handed weapons at the same time, but only on the attack action, not a granted attack or a bonus action or a reaction. So there's a lot of complexity. And so he points out things like you need to start tracking what weapon you ended up with at the end of your turn in your hand, so you know what you can or can't switch to, or do you even need to do a switch based on the next scenario?
I just had the greatest idea for a D&D accessory now.
Oh.
Hands. You have hands that you set in front of you on the table. They're sticking up with Velcro, and you can put words on them. Like shield, weapon, right? Spell focus, free hand, right? And then you put, let's get this. Somebody make this. Ghostfire products team. I got you.
Yeah, I love it as much as I hate it. And he does things like argue that maybe because of sort of looking at the issues of accessibility, that they are taking away the wording that used to say other hand. So like another light weapon in another hand. So it can also be argued that you can use the same hand to stow and draw a different light weapon. And then he says something like, maybe they were hoping that optimizers won't abuse it. And then he just laughs out loud. He points out that Nick doesn't specify which weapon must have the weapon mastery. So it could be not the weapon that actually is dealing the weapon mastery. I don't know. And then he goes through all kinds of different sort of uses and combos and so on that are really kind of interesting. So he goes through three main topics: super cleave, and he walks through, and it's nice. He sort of uses like Roll20 or something else like that, like to structure, to show you the physical layout of creatures. And he says, okay, if you've got two adjacent targets, start with a topple on the first, stow that topple weapon as part of your attack, draw a cleave weapon with your next attack, and the first attack roll has advantage, which improves the chance of the second cleave attack going off, right? Okay, you're not adjacent. What do you do now? Well, the crusher feat can be used with the right weapon to knock them prone and push them around you. So because it doesn't say it has to be in a straight line. So you move them around you with your crusher feat. So they're now adjacent and prone, and now you can do the same cleave thing. Or you use a push weapon first to push them adjacent to the other one, then you cleave both of them. And with Polearm Master, you can increase this, but again, you got to track which weapon you're holding at the end of each turn to make sure that you can do the things you want to do. He does topple lancing, and this is where you can get into the real abusive stuff, right? And then we saw a lot of this in 4th edition. So you can use a lance, which is a reach weapon and has topple, and the Polearm Master feat. Now you can attack from 5 feet away and knock someone prone. You now move back. and so that they're outside of your reach. Now they get up, which uses up half their movement. They move, let's say, 5 feet towards you. They're in your reach. So now you use your reaction with Polearm Mastery. You attack and knock them prone. And now they can't get up because they've used more than half their movement.
Half the movement.
They could crawl, attack at disadvantage, or dash but no attack, right? So it's that kind of annoying thing that your DM's just going to go, oh my God, are you going to do this all the time? Yes, all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a number of others here. So you can take a look at this. He talks about how you can get, the 9th level with AC 24, 4 attacks and a free shove, the combo Vex and Nick, all sorts of stuff. There's some of it in our show notes. I won't go into all the levels of detail, but it just really shows you some of these concepts. And again, what he's saying is, it seems like this all seems to be intended, right? Otherwise, wouldn't they have written it differently?
Yeah. Well, we will cleanse our palate of that by getting into some convention news. The Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, called PAGE, has come to our attention through friend of the show, Phil Wirtz. PAGE is January 16th through 19th in Oaks, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. Why are we highlighting this show? Well, it looks like it's going to be big. They're going to have over 60 special guests and over 500 scheduled TTRPG games. This is a role-playing heavy convention with a smattering of card games and board games. There's a vendor hall, a charity auction, and an opportunity to support the Gamers Assistance Program, a 501c3 focusing on our charitable giving from the convention's auction. And we present this to you with also the added benefit of, if you buy a badge, you can use the discount code Mastering Dungeons, all one word, capital M, capital D, and you will get $10 off any type of badge. There's a link in our show notes to the Tabletops event site where you can sign up for this convention. Again, it's the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. And they also have a Facebook page, and they're on our Discord server. And we have an invite to the Discord area in our show notes. Anything else to add there, Teos?
Yeah, it was nice to speak with both of them at both of the main organizers at GameholeCon, and just hear their passion for the show, right? Their excitement of how it's been growing and how they're seeing their efforts gain traction, and they feel really good about the charitable work they're doing with it. So there's a lot of passion there, a lot of intentionality that I really appreciated in the show. So if I were at all in that area, I would be heading there. It seems like a lot of fun.
Yep, I will. It's a bit of a drive for me, but I'm going to see what I can do with my schedule to see if I can get there.
Cool.
We go from conventions to Mongoose Publishing's 2024 report. Mongoose does a yearly report. Their president is Matthew Sprange. Yeah. And so he does this. And what did they talk about in their report?
Yeah, so they talked again about something we've covered in previous shows, where they are working towards Mongoose being employee-owned and employee-run. And they've been sort of transitioning various things that are sort of, controlled behind the scenes and trying to get different employees up to speed on all of this. And they talked about it sort of in a little bit vague terms this time, but saying kind of we've been doing that, but we had all these other things come up that have kind of kept us from doing that as much as we wanted to. So this is still the goal, but it's taking a little longer than expected to get to that point. They did say that staff are making decisions. For example, they had an opportunity out of nowhere where the people owning or who own the company they rent, or the building they rent, said, would you like to buy this building? So they put it to a vote, and everybody talked through, what does that mean for us if we take on this cost? And they said that plus the acquisition of Traveler led to higher costs this year. And that also kind of set them back a bit on being employee owned, because there's a lot there to take on around the financial impact of that. They kind of diverge for a bit and talk about how they're not using AI and get into the why of it. They say overall it's an expensive year. They're hoping that 2025 will see big returns. They talked about a lot of different traveler releases that they have planned, including a video game that is in early stages. They've got another video game project that they're working on, and then this one is just beginning, and they showed some early screenshots of what the game would look like, which I thought was cool. So link in our show notes, or go to forum.mongoosepublishing.com and you can look for State of the Mongoose.
State of the Mongoose, indeed. Now, State of D&D meetup groups. That is what our next topic is. There is a blog called Seed of Worlds where they had an article that looks back on lessons learned from using Meetup to bring new players to a store's D&D events. And Meetup was huge when I first got back into gaming for 3rd edition. I was on several meetups and got together with groups that way. Is that still something that can be done? One game store tried to find out. And what did they learn, Teos?
Well, they learned that once the costs went up 174%, they turned it off. But before they did that, they gave this retrospective of how it played out. And they said they set up a gaming night just after the D&D movie came out, sort of a new person, not a regular game night, just a special event. And they immediately had 60 signups via Meetup. And this store is in Austria, right? And 45 of the 60 showed up for the event, which is, I mean, that's amazing. Then they tried it again after the Baldur's Gate 3 launch and again in February. And each time they had a bunch of new folks sign up. But what was interesting was the impetus of all of this was, of course, to promote their store, but also to fill out their normal Friday night events that they have. And what they said was actually very few of the people that showed up, even though it was so good at getting people in for those special events, very few transition to the regular game nights that they have. They don't say kind of what, why that might have been. And I found that to be a real kind of puzzle, like something there didn't transition these folks over, and you'd think could have. But they did say Meetup helped them get a lot of new folks to these. They suspect a few folks did come over to the regular gaming nights, but what they saw was it's really people Googling it that led to hundreds. If they look at where people came from, Google is bringing in hundreds compared to the Meetup for the regular nights. So in the end, they ended up turning it off because of those cost increases, and they still got a lot of growth in there. But yeah, it's an interesting question, right? It's not just bringing them in, but retaining them, and there may be different solutions involved, right? And I thought that was pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. And finally, our creator corner this week is Jeff Stevens Games stealing Christmas. Why would Jeff do that? Oh, because Figgy Puddin' Steals Christmas is a one-shot Christmas-themed dungeon crawl adventure with options for 5th edition D&D, Pathfinder 2e, and the Shadow Dark RPG. This is kickstarting right now. The Kickstarter ends on the 19th of November at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. You can back it with PDF or print on demand. And it also will be available through Roll20, the Foundry VTT, and Shard Tabletop. So if you want to get in your Christmas gaming goodness in 3 different RPGs, you can do so with Figgy Puddin' Steals Christmas from Jeff Stevens Games.
Fantastic.